So that was a study that was done by Berkeley. And there's other study, a 2020 study conducted by one of today's panelists. She and her colleagues found that about 85% of recently installed school HVAC systems they looked at did not provide adequate ventilation. So the good news is right now we have an opportunity to make lasting improvements that will benefit teaching and learning conditions. We have the expertise and technical roadmap. We have new funding from the federal and state government, and we have passionate educators, parents, and public school officials who are committed to making sure that these long overdue upgrades happen. I'm excited about the prospects of what we can do together to improve the indoor air quality inside our schools. So this morning, we'll hear from researchers and practitioners and some of the folks I mentioned who have gotten an on-the-job PhD in this. And we hope you will leave with new concrete information and inspiration to improve air quality in your schools locally. First, I'm going to introduce Jeff Vincent from UC Berkeley. Jeff is the co-founder and director of the Public Infrastructure Initiatives of the Center for Cities and Schools at UC Berkeley. This is a national leader on public school facilities, planning, policy, and finance, and works extensively with local, state, and federal agencies. He's led the COVID response there. He advised on CDC's reopening guidelines and served on a National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine ad hoc committee on school reopening. Jeff has long been looking at the need to upgrade public school facilities and is a PhD in city and regional planning from Berkeley. Welcome, Jeff.
Great. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone on a Sunday. I'm going to be brief because there's a lot of us here and I want to learn from all of you. But thank you all for being here. And thank you for allowing me to be here. So, what I'm going to do quickly is kind of put this in context in terms of like what we're up against as a state and really as a nation in terms of like reopening our schools safely. And so hoping it will be helpful to sort of set up Teresa's comments later on some of the technical issues around HVAC and ventilation and to hear from all of you about what you're doing. First, let me pull up, actually, I'm going to show just a couple of slides, which hopefully will be helpful to you all. And I assume everyone can see those. And if you can't, maybe Josh, give me a wave or something. Our center at Berkeley has been curating tools from around the country for school facility managers on how to safely reopen. And these are mainly from university researchers who study how to make buildings safely, kind of as the center was alluding to. These are all available for download on our website. And if you're like me, things have been coming at you like a fire hose, and it's hard to distinguish sort of what's good, what's bad, but all this stuff is like coming from reputable researchers at top tier universities nationally, and really tools. Some of them are downloadable Excel sheets and stuff where you can kind of plug in your own info on analyzing your own buildings and whatnot. So, as the center said, I mean, it's abundantly clear that this virus is airborne. If anyone in your community does not understand this, researchers and others have created really good visuals, some of which we link to on our website here. Tell people understand this. And the simplest analogy is smoke, right? If you're in a room with someone smoking, that smoke is going to permeate the room. And the same thing is going to happen if you're in a room with someone who's infected with this virus. It will permeate the room unless you have ventilation. And so what the Delta variant has shown us quite clearly is that we cannot rely on one measure alone. We cannot rely on vaccines alone. You have to have a layered approach. And I think that's part of the nuance here, right? So, the key layers available to us obviously are masks, vaccines, distancing, hand washing, and of course, ventilation. So, we've been arguing quite passionately for, well over a year that, to safely reopen schools, we have to talk about indoor air quality and ventilation. And every school really has to have a plan for doing so. And hopefully we'll get into the technology and devices on this. But really, this has to be tailored, as you all know, who are running schools and running school districts. This has to be almost tailored to every building and every classroom, right? Because they're all different. And just to give you kind of a snapshot of the state, we have about 10,000 schools in California, and we have about 730 million square feet of space. And on average, these are 50 years old, right? So it's no wonder that we've got issues with performance and different things that need upgrading. And so, what we have been studying for many years now is how is it that we walk into buildings and school buildings and they are they don't seem up to par, right? They seem substandard. And so because we don't have information on a school by school basis or district by district basis on kind of the conditions and qualities of schools, we've said, okay, what are we spending on our schools? And can that be a good proxy what are we spending on our school facilities? Can that be a good proxy to understand like what's the condition on the ground? And so, we've done a handful of studies on looking at our California school districts upkeeping their buildings. And frankly, the findings have been quite alarming. We looked at both maintenance and operations benchmarks for good stewardship, as well as capital investment benchmarks. And what we found is that nearly 40% of districts in California are falling short on these benchmarks every year. And so what that has shown us is like, there's sort of growing deferred maintenance lists across California. So it makes sense that district leaders are kind of scrambling and struggling to figure out how to best improve HVAC and ventilation. And what I would like to tell you, and I think hopefully you're realizing, is like, yeah, it's really challenging, it's really technical, but there are both sort of short-term and long-term solutions. And as the senator alluded to, there's money to address this, which we haven't had for a bit. So, even though we've got this sort of structural underinvestment going on, and the findings on that are that HVAC is actually one of the most outdated and underperforming systems in our schools. For example, many of them can't even use MERV 13 filters, which are the recommendation here. And as the senator alluded to, even before the pandemic, there was a lot of research showing that indoor air quality was really subpar in too many classrooms. And so, why is that? Well, there hasn't been the politics or the finance to upgrade those. And I would argue that, the state has a real role here, and I'm glad that they're stepping up. But if you look at, a decade ago, the state of California was contributing, a little bit over 30% of capital expenditures that school districts across California were putting into their buildings. And in recent years, that's plummeted to less than 20%. So it's really, we need to ask going forward, as there's school bond bills in the legislature, what is that state-local partnership in terms of upkeeping and modernizing our school facilities? And I think that's a really important policy question, for us as we're going forward. So, I'd like to end kind of on on a sort of proactive point, which the senator alluded to, which is we can turn this around, and really now is the time. I mean, if there's anything, I keep telling people, if there is a silver lining in this pandemic, it might be that we come out of it all with an understanding and an agreement that we need to upgrade our schools, and all of our children need to be in healthy, safe environments every day. And so, if we do that when the pandemic is, behind us at some point, that's a huge gain on achievement, on teacher retention, et cetera. So now's the time to do it, because I think there's both a political will at the local level, state level, even the federal level. And most of you probably know this, but there are new funding opportunities at the federal level in the ARP, the American Rescue Plan. Funds can be used specifically for ventilation upgrades, and the Department of Ed has very clear guidance on this. The state, there is, which hopefully Teresa will talk about, the California Energy Commission is like, I think the deadline is, one of the first deadlines is rapidly approaching, even later this month. There is both plumbing and ventilation upgrade funding available for schools, specifically around COVID reopening. So those opportunities are there. And as I said, there's a couple bills in the legislature right now for a new state bond. We need people talking about the need for that, because the last one that we had in March 2020 failed. Actually, the voters rejected it. Maybe they weren't aware of the issues. So I'm going to close with that and say that we are curating these tools. We continue to do so, and hopefully this can be a resource for you. The URL is there. My email is there. You are more than welcome to email me with specific questions on that. And our Twitter is extremely active on pushing out the latest on ventilation technology and research. And there's a lot of new research coming out on the effectiveness of different technologies. And we're pushing that out quite regularly on a daily basis. So we are a resource for you. And I look forward to learning from the rest of you on this panel. So thank you, Senator, and thank you all.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you for that. I did not know about these resources, and we'll check the Twitter, and to be able to have you as a resource is phenomenal for the folks here. So thank you very much. Now I will turn over to Teresa Pistocchini from UC Davis. She's a registered professional engineer and the engineering manager at the UC Davis Western Cooling Efficiency Center. For over 10 years, she's conducted applied research in heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, including studies focused on California school buildings. She co-authored an important roadmap for school districts early in the pandemic, the Ventilation and Energy Efficiency Verification and Repair Program for school reopening. Thank you, Teresa.
Great, thank you for having me. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, so want to spend about 10 to 15 minutes today just summarizing the methods available to reduce risk of airborne COVID-19 transmission. The most important point, I think there's great agreement on this in California, fortunately, but masks are the most important mitigation measure we have in terms of airborne transmission. What masks do is reduce the number of particles that enter into the air, so that's less particles that HVAC systems have to remove. So step one. Once even wearing masks, a certain fraction of respiratory aerosols will get into the air. And then from there, we can remove them in 3 ways. I just want to cover what those are. So ventilation is replacing indoor air with outdoor air. We always have to have conservation of mass. So when we bring in fresh outdoor air, we exhaust essentially contaminated indoor air. And so it's an air exchange. Filtration is running air through a filter, and that removes a certain percentage of particles every time we do that, including respiratory aerosols. And then finally, particles will just naturally settle onto surfaces, and those are removed by cleaning, or they just essentially naturally become inactive over time. And when we want to talk about the probability of infection, so what's the probability that one student becomes infected from another student? I just want to point out that we don't need to understand this full equation, but generally that's modeled using something called the Wells-Riley equation. The infection risk is a function of exposure time, right? So the longer we're in this space together, the higher the probability that someone will become infected. And then also though, the risk is reduced by the more ventilation that we have and the more filtration we have. And this is essentially like a sliding scale. So every essentially unit of ventilation we add or unit of filtration we add, the risk goes down. And so sometimes it's hard to answer the question of how much ventilation or how much filtration, because every unit you add further reduces risk. So how do HVAC systems ventilate and filter? So this is just a side view of an HVAC system. We have air that returns from the classroom, comes into the system, and then it mixes with some outdoor air, some fraction of outdoor air, which is adjustable, and some of the air is exhausted. The air streams mix together, move through a filter, which removes some particulates and respiratory aerosols, goes through a fan, is heated or cooled, and goes back to your room. And so the tools we have available to us are an ability to adjust this outdoor air fraction, these dampers that are in here, and an ability to pick what air filter is used. There are 2 videos on our website at this link here. One is about ventilation and the other is about filtration. They're like 6 to 8 minutes each. And I just want to recommend those for your viewing, and also please feel free to share them with parents and teachers and people in your districts. So the question is, how much outdoor air? Like I said, we can adjust that fraction all the way up to potentially 100% of the air being delivered by the HVAC system could be outdoor air. The limitation that we're working against is that most HVAC control systems that are used in school districts need to be physically accessed to make that outdoor air adjustment. So you've got to, open up a panel, you got to go, and most school HVAC systems are like 1 HVAC system per classroom. So you're talking about thousands of HVAC systems in a district. And so frequent adjustments are impractical. There are some cloud-based systems that some schools and districts might have that may allow them some types of like remote adjustments, but I'm going to say that's in the minority. It's my suspicion. So more outdoor air. So why not just go through and set all those systems to be 100% outdoor air, which has certainly been suggested by some organizations. The problem with that is if you go set all your systems to 100% outdoor air, is you will reduce risk of disease transmission, but you will increase exposure to outdoor pollutants, which is a big deal, particularly in wildfire season. And that outdoor pollutant exposure has an impact to students over time and increases risk of illness. So then the other issue is not so much on the peninsula, but still a concern, having thermal comfort problems, right? Like most likely, being too cold, like in the winter. And so what can happen is if districts go to 100% outdoor air, and then there's a wildfire, and then it's cold, there's a lot of teacher and student complaints, and then that results in districts going and closing outdoor air dampers. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes no outdoor air to eliminate the complaints. And then you're kind of just in this, cycle of disaster, basically. Yeah. And so my recommendation, which has been the same since the pandemic started, is just test and adjust each system to deliver the code required amount of ventilation in California, which is 15 CFM per person. This will provide significant protection against infectious disease spread. It will allow the HVAC system to meet its set points because systems are designed to work at this amount of outdoor air. And it will also be fairly safe in a wildfire situation, such as you don't have to make adjustments in that situation. My recommendation is to use the certified test and air balance technician. And I've listed the certification agencies here. Jeff mentioned the CalShape program. All my recommendations are consistent with the CalShape program, which requires that you go set each ventilation system to 15 CFM per person and uses a tab technician. So then once you have your mechanical system set up to provide that 15 CFM of air per person, encourage teachers to open doors and windows when it's safe and when conditions permit. So when weather is nice and when there's no smoke, we can get some extra outdoor air that way. And that's just a practical way of dealing with what we have available right now. So what about smoke? Like I said, even on smoky days, maintain outdoor air rates of 15 CFM per person. In my opinion, it's unsafe to completely close an outdoor air damper when airborne infectious disease is a concern. It's a concern right now due to the pandemic. It's also a concern during cold and flu season and influenza. So I would really never recommend doing that. I will mention many HVAC systems have an economizer function, which means when the room is calling for cooling, when the room is warm and it's cold outside, it will bring in extra outdoor air for the purposes of cooling the room efficiently without using so much compressor energy. If it's possible for a facility manager to disable those, like particularly remotely, just that economizer, that free cooling function, that makes sense, right? Because why should we bring in extra outdoor air to save a little bit of energy if it's really smoky? And then we can use filtration to improve indoor air quality. So I have over here 2 plots. This was during the campfire event, which caused terrible smoke back in 2018, obviously in addition to massive death and destruction. But here in the Bay Area and Sacramento, what we experienced was the smoke, some of the worst days I've ever experienced. And this is monitoring that we had ongoing at the time at a Sacramento region high school. And so you can see here were 2 days. November 14th was a moderate smoke day. And then November 15th was the worst day that we had. This is the week that caused the schools throughout Northern California to close. And but on this particular day, these 2 days, school was open here in this high school. And so we were operating these ventilation systems. They were operating at my recommendation level of 15 CFM per person. We actually had commissioned and tested those systems as part of the research study. And so you can see here we had 2 rooms, one with a MERV 8 filter and one with a MERV 13 filter. excuse me. And you can see that the MERV 13 filter performed much better than the MERV 8 filter and actually reduced the particulates in the room compared to outdoors by around 50%. So that was true on the moderate smoke day and also the severe smoke day. So we're ventilating, but we're also filtering, and we're still providing a pretty decent environment inside that classroom. Now, on a day this bad, again, this is the week that school closed, right? We had this is the average over the whole day. So the peak was worse. So average was over 200 and PM 2.5 was over 200. And so, you know, we just have to, I think, acknowledge that on days with very poor outdoor air quality, you know, even if we can create this sort of survivable limit inside the classroom, it's at some point, like when we get to AQIs, like 200, 250, 300, really only option left is to close schools, because also students have to move between classrooms and all of that. So at some point, students are safer at home. So filter selection, as I described, MERV 13 is recommended both to reduce spread of infectious disease and also to reduce exposure to smoke. And basically, every time you go through a MERV 13 filter, you remove a fairly significant fraction of particles on the order of 40%. And you should change these filters every 3 to 4 months. The cost per classroom per year, I estimate as an additional $20 to $40. Really, most existing HVAC systems can accommodate a MERV 13 filter, and we talk about that extensively in this video here. I have seen some filter companies sell what they claim are MERV 13 filters, and then when I actually ask for the test data, I find out that they're not. So if you really want to cover your bases, get an ASHRAE 52 test report on your filter. Most filter companies will give you that upon request, and confirms that you're getting what you think you're buying. Portable air cleaners, consider them certainly when ventilation isn't adequate or you can't use a MERV 13 filter. Consider CARB certification, the cost, energy efficiency, and noise. I have a white paper here on selecting portable air cleaners that goes through all these metrics and essentially ranks some inexpensive options. Avoid any extras inside your portable air cleaner, just use mechanical filtration. So finally, I just want to talk about carbon dioxide monitoring. So carbon dioxide monitors provide essentially a real-time indication of whether or not your ventilation system is working as designed. So background, just in our ambient environment, our carbon dioxide is about 400 parts per million, and occupants exhale CO2 when we breathe. And so this essentially serves as a tracer, because if we're ventilating, we're removing some of that carbon dioxide. And so a well-ventilated space should remain below 1,100 parts per million. I estimate this costs between $500 and $750 a classroom. There are other types of sensors that you may get in some of these low-cost packages. Particulate matter is one. However, particulate matter data is pretty well readily available from a local, EPA station online. Excuse me, still smoky here. Volatile organic compounds, which all the data shows that those have very poor accuracy. So I wouldn't, if they're in your package, I wouldn't do anything with that data. Certainly don't use what's labeled a CO2 equivalent sensor. You want a real CO2 sensor. Anyway, at the end of the day, I suggest focusing on just looking at those CO2 values as a means to detect ventilation system problems. Just list some options here. We're in the process. We've actually tested 16 different models of CO2 sensors, and we're putting together a website on them. But I just wanted to show here that there's lots of different options available. Generally speaking, everything we've tested performed quite well. Okay, so just in summary, listing priorities, again, is they're consistent with the Cal SHAPE program. test, adjust, and repair existing ventilation systems to get that 15 CFM per person, and then use doors and windows as extra ventilation. Install MERV 13 filters or better in central HVAC, and monitor your indoor carbon dioxide levels. One question came in and was forwarded to me, and it talked about how do we communicate to our stakeholders. I wanted to encourage sharing those videos. And then the other thing I was thinking about is like, what evidence can school districts provide that they're taking these steps? Certainly those test and air balance reports I mentioned, those could be shared with like union leaders and school site council representatives, particularly if you have like a mechanical engineer do like a summary, write a short report about a summary of the findings from the TAB report. That can be very helpful. If you display those carbon dioxide levels in the classrooms, like on the wall, and communicate what that means, that can help build some transparency and confidence. And certainly an open window might bring some assurance to a parent as well. Filtration, you can share the filters that you're using with key stakeholders. And certainly one of the really nice things about portable air cleaners, even though MERV 13 filters, you get more bang for your buck out of them, adding that portable air cleaner in the room is like a visual, reassurance, I think, as well. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. That was wonderful. I learned a lot, and I've been trying to get up to speed on this, but this was that was super helpful. And so now I'd like to turn over first Laura Curry, as I mentioned, with the California Teacher Association's real partner in putting this event together, and introduced me to Teresa and Jeff, who we just heard from. She has a master's degree in public health from the University of Berkeley. She worked in the field of occupational health and safety during the SARS-1 outbreak and served in labor health and safety programs at both UC Berkeley and UCLA. And then we'll hear from, I mentioned when I was calling around talking to different union leaders, many had gotten a PhD in ventilation. For Craig Childress, is easier probably than others because he's a physics teacher now in his 29th year, and we'll hear from him. And then Danny Yanow from South San Francisco is in his 25th year of teaching. I'll turn it over to them, and then I'll introduce our next speaker. Laura, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Senator Becker, for hosting today's webinar. And I want to thank Jeff and Teresa and other indoor experts in the UC system, like Dr. Kim Prather down at UC San Diego, for their work and their expertise and their service to our community in these really tough times. Since the beginning of this pandemic, our union, the California Teachers Association, and our affiliates across the state have really been guided by community conditions, by science, and by public health advice. We have strongly advocated, as Jeff mentioned, for multiple layers of protection, including vaccinations, masking, physical distancing, robust testing, and healthy indoor air quality. And educators really began to prioritize proper ventilation and air filtration as an essential layer very early on in the spring of 2020, because we knew that teachers' working conditions are students' learning conditions. Everyone inside a school building is sharing the same air. Students, classroom teachers, school site staff, administrators, parent volunteers, we all have a stake in making sure that the air we breathe inside our schools is healthy and safe. So because of that, teachers in their local communities across the state advocated through the collective bargaining process for indoor air quality guarantees. And our members reached local collective bargaining agreements with many school districts that ensure that students will learn in classrooms with proper ventilation, because we know adequate fresh air helps children learn better and dilutes infectious and other harmful particles. Teachers also reached agreements that classrooms will have quality filters that effectively clean the air, like the MERV 13s and the HEPA filters Teresa talked about. And in many places, we've raised red flags to prevent exposure to some of these unproven technologies like bipolar ionization that Teresa mentioned, that state and federal public health officials and university air scientists have really strongly cautioned against. And in many places, we've also reached agreement about making sure that CO2 monitors are installed for the first time in many California schools, so that those ventilation problems are detected very early and can be fixed in a timely way. And as Teresa mentioned, to also be another place of assurance that the ventilation in the room is happening the way it is supposed to. So, here we are at this new school year. In light of the Delta variant, it's been a challenging time for many schools. And we want to thank all of the parents and families that we've partnered with every day, and to thank families and school leaders who have been collaborating with educators over the past 18 months to bring health and safety to our communities and to implement the measures we need in our schools and our classrooms. Our advocacy for improved ventilation and air filtration has been essential during this crisis. But as the Senator mentioned from the opening, and as Jeff underscored, the investments and improvements that we make today into our mechanical ventilation systems in our schools will last far beyond this pandemic. It will help us weather the challenges posed by wildfire smoke, annual cold and flu season, and the harmful outdoor pollutants from factories and freeways. So we look forward to our ongoing partnership with all of you on this call here today. And we thank the Senator for raising up these essential issues that so impact health and learning. And I'd like to pass it over to two local union leaders, Danny Yano and Craig Childress, to talk about the local advocacy efforts of their members around indoor air quality. So Danny, Craig, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Craig, do you want to go ahead first?
Certainly I can. Well, first of all, Senator Becker, thank you very much for organizing this and inviting both experts and representatives of teachers associations. I really appreciate being able to be involved in this, and also really appreciate just the effort that you've made, both in this venue, but also with testing and vaccination advocacy as well for teachers. So I'll be brief, but I just want to mention a couple of things. This has been the 2020 has been a challenging year. All years teaching in a high school classroom are challenging, but it was a really challenging year, and I think it was complicated by the fact that, with all due respect, there were many in our in leadership roles in many districts who, well, for lack of a better term, did not take the seriousness of the pandemic to quite the degree that it should have been. And so in many cases, we worked very hard to convince our leaders to take strong action. That said, I'm really thankful for this topic, because I sort of became the ventilation and air quality advocate for our district, because there was very little being done in terms of testing of systems and looking at performance of classroom ventilation systems. We did secure an MOU, and I'll talk a memorandum of understanding for a return to school that did include many things like the typical, we're going to follow all the guidance, we're going to follow the distancing rules. We tested staff and students every 2 weeks. We had, because of the distancing rules, we had a smaller than normal attendance group, but ventilation was a big one. And I started advocating in March, the end of March of 2020, for testing of every space in our district. And that fell on deaf ears for quite some time, I think maybe because of the sheer magnitude of the task. I worked pretty tirelessly over the summer advocating for it. I even went so far as to do experiments in my classroom. I got 10 kilograms of dry ice and allowed it to sublimate, and actually tested the ventilation systems myself in my classroom and colleagues' classrooms, just to see what was going on. I was actually pretty impressed, at least in our building. We had pretty good performance from the proxy of CO2 concentration. The The district did finally engage in a contract with a local HVAC engineering company that did test the airflow rates for all the spaces that occupied both adults and students. And the target was to meet the ASHRAE guidelines of 4 to 6 air changes per hour. Now, I noticed Ms. Pisticini mentioned 15 CFM per person. If you multiply that times 35 students in my class, that's 525 CFM. My room's about 15,700 cubic feet, pardon me. And so that comes out to 2 air changes per hour. I'm pleased to say that many, if not most of our buildings in our school district were in the 4 to 6 air change per hour rate, which was pretty impressive. Now, there were some pretty bad hot spots in some of the older buildings and some of the campuses that did not meet those requirements. So other mitigating measures such as air filtration systems, keeping windows open, and actually using other spaces, we had to end up having teachers and students move to other spaces. Those rooms, all those spaces in our district, I'm pleased to say that the district has taken advantage of not only existing funding, deferred maintenance, but also the funding that Mr. Vincent talked about to improve the HVAC in all of those spaces that were substandard. So those projects are not complete, but they are in fact ongoing. The district did share with us the test air balance reports for all the rooms. And for the rooms that were not quite up to par or were on the lower end of two air changes per hour, I lobbied the district, and we did get CO2 meters that were displayed in the classrooms for all of those spaces. The standard is the widely publicized standard of 1100 ppm is certainly, you know, well understood. I was able to get the district to target 800 ppm or lower before countermeasures were taking place, whether it be moving a classroom or having students split up into other separate classrooms. So we did a lot of work on air quality and and ventilation. But again, I think at the beginning it was uncertain at best, and that was uncomfortable. But I was pleasantly surprised that most of our spaces were in pretty good shape. Yeah, and in terms of ventilation, that's effectively where we've been. And my big advocacy now is in this realm. There are lots of things that we're still talking about in terms of COVID mitigation and testing and so forth. But my big focus right now is to try and get CO2 monitors in every classroom. Again, not only for that. For monitoring, but also for community reassurance that things are actually working the way they should. And I think that's all I have in terms of what I'm doing in my district.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I just, in preparation for this, I was learning. So I bought one of the monitors just for my house. That there's a home version that one of the ones that Teresa recommended. So that'll be interesting when that gets here. We'll turn it over to Danny, and we're running a little short on time, so we keep your remarks a little brief, some discussion, and we've one more speaker, but please go ahead, Danny.
Okay, well, I just, our district, I'm in South San Francisco, is in the northern part of the peninsula. In the southern part of the peninsula, they're used to heat. So I believe, Craig, that you guys have a built-in air conditioning system anyway. None of the buildings in my district have air conditioning. Some of them don't even have any kind of HVAC system except a built-in air heater, a heater in the wall. So we got drop-in air purifiers for every room. When I looked at them and I said, this is for 1,000 square feet, and my classroom is 1,200 square feet. I think I should have 2. They said, no, it turns over the air often enough that it's okay. The HVAC guy said, no, it turns over the air often enough for your room. So I've been running around telling teachers to keep their doors and windows open all the time. My big concern now is that with smoke season coming in, they're all going to close their doors and windows and rely on these air purifiers, which I suspect are not adequate for the space. We've been advocating for 10 years. We've had, hot falls where rooms heat up to 90 degrees. And we've been screaming for air conditioning in all the rooms for years, which we haven't gotten. And when the smoke season started every year, we started screaming for some kind of air purification so that the air in the rooms would be better than the air in the children's homes. So we could tell parents, hey, it's better to send your kids to school than to send them home, than to keep them at home. But that all fell on deaf ears with our board. But finally, because of COVID, we've gotten these air purifiers. However, the air purifiers are very loud and teachers are complaining about that. I'm using a microphone and an amp in my room. Some schools have bought little mics for the teachers. But my big question is, what happens when the air is bad, as like yesterday? And is there going to be transmission because of everybody's going to be shutting their doors and windows? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Danny. And maybe Teresa can address that, but that shows all the compounding issues of this. We have the filter in the room, but then the noise. And so it's good we have, to bring that up, and we have to keep adjusting. We have many, and looking around, many, I see a lot of school board members on the line. I asked Jennifer DeBrienza to speak because I know about some of the work that Palo Alto had done. I see Alan Sarver from my school district as well. We'll maybe give him a moment as well, because I know that we talked a lot about this yesterday. But Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and talk about some of the work that you guys have done?
Sure, I will keep it brief because I know that people probably have questions for the experts. And although I have learned a lot more about filtration and ventilation over the past year, I'm certainly not the expert. Obviously, it's been quite a year. And I think that I'm really thrilled to hear what everyone has said so far, especially our experts at the beginning, and actually the people that have become experts in the middle. It's pretty much what we have done. The systems that we have that have HVAC, we were able to put in MERV 13 filters. And, I think this is true for everyone, no matter what your financial situation is in your district. Normally, there were a lot of state and federal funds that came in. And we immediately put those to use with filters and with testing the air circulation, right? The airflow of recirculated and outside air for every classroom. And there are a lot of classrooms, as our last speaker said, that don't have an HVAC system, right? There are older buildings or whatnot. And so we did buy these portable air filters, and after some experimentation found that 2 medium ones make a lot less noise than 1 big one. So there's been some of that sort of fine tuning along the way. But I think that regularly replacing our MERV 13 filters in the rooms where we have them, and making sure we have those portable filters in the rooms where we don't. One of the things that hasn't been mentioned yet, although this Berkeley site is new to me and I can't wait to check that out. I know that our facilities team came upon an MIT website that let you put in all of your data, that let you put in how many kids in a room, the cubic space of the room, and then estimate about what percentage of people in the room are vaccinated and how many are wearing their masks properly, and estimate how long that room can be occupied before it needs to be, cleaned out or emptied or whatnot. And you can also do it if you have to close all the doors and windows because of the fires. So that's been really helpful for us to know that, okay, this room can be occupied for 2 hours before it increases the likelihood of spreading COVID and we have to move students out. I will try to get that to you, Senator, the link to that MIT
Yeah,
website.
that'd be great. That'd be great.
And one of the other things that the state has done, another way that Sacramento has helped us, is approving a bill that lets that reimburses districts for testing each room. And so we've been able to test every room, and it looks like everyone's really working on that, which is really helpful. So I'll stop there because I know that people probably have questions for the people that know what they're talking about. Thank you.
That's great. And on some of that reimbursement, again, maybe everybody knows that, maybe everybody doesn't. about, how to get reimbursed and that process. So anyway, just again, share that with me, and I'll try to share that out afterwards, Jennifer, if you can. I'd like to, since our superintendent did join, very nice for her on a Sunday morning, I'd like to turn it over to Nancy McGee for any thoughts you have.
Thanks, Senator Becker. This has been a really great session. While I've learned more about ventilation in the last couple of years than I ever thought I would as an English teacher, I keep learning more. But I do want to make one comment, and that is that this is bigger than COVID. There was an article in the Cal Matters, and I'm going to put the link in the chat, about the number of school days that students have missed in California because of power outages, smoke emergencies, safety alerts regarding on-campus violence, et cetera. And it's an enormous number of school days. There's a lot of data in this research. And what I would advocate for our state is to be the leader in what I call climate ready schools, and that we build and sustain and maintain schools that can provide safe environments for students and staff, regardless of heat, flood, fire, pandemic, whatever's coming at us, largely because of climate disturbances. But we have to think towards the future and build this idea of climate-ready buildings, school buildings, so that our kids can come to school and be healthy every single day. So that's just hats off to all of the teachers for all of their advocacy, for the school leaders for all of their efforts, and we will continue to work together to build these safest environments we can for our students.
Thank you, Nancy. I love that notion of climate ready school. I'd never heard that before. And it's particularly apt right now in this state and with what we are going through. So I'll try to bring that to the state level. Alan, you get the home court advantage since you're my kids are in high school at the Sequoia Union High School District. Any thoughts? You were saying yesterday that about some of the work you've done.
Yes. So the Sequoia Union High School District, we really throughout the pandemic have approached the reopening of schools through the lens of classroom facility readiness. And we have Associate Superintendent Krista Leach, who is our interim superintendent, has joined the call as well. And she's really the person from our district who got that HVAC PhD during the work that was done, but really by leading with a dashboard of the work that was being done and where we were going in getting the classrooms ready. That was really the anchor for the quality of our MOU negotiations with our staff for reopening and with the community for being ready to safely bring the students back into the class. And I'd like to ask Crystal to kind of say a few words about some of the things that we were working on.
Thank you, President Sarver. So we started doing a complete audit of our HVAC systems. That started probably in May after we went remote in that March of 2020. That was something that our district had not done before. We have a variety of updated systems and then systems that are highly aged, but with the goal of the 4 to 6 air changes with that 30% outside air. So we met that through a combination of ways, installing window fans, purifiers, adjusting dampers, all which were mentioned on this call previously. Some of the challenge is that that's very manual. And the COVID funds did assist with that, but those aren't permanent fixes, right? It was, what can we do now to get our kiddos back in school as soon as possible for the ventilation? They do have some, instead of unintended consequences, some benefits as far as most of our classrooms do not have air conditioning, so, and they don't have units that can handle the MERV 13, but definitely the air cycling through the classroom, definitely adds to comfort. So that's similar to what South San Francisco is going through, and then some of our other districts that have older classrooms. As mentioned with the dampers and some of the aging units, we don't have updated controls, so it's very manual. A lot of what we had to do was manual. And so really fixing the infrastructure is beyond, unfortunately, the COVID funds that we did receive. The need is much greater. And then you have your aging classrooms as well. You have to look at the other energy efficiency within the classroom. So it very much is a big conversation that I would love to have with Jeff from Berkeley, is to kind of give you an insight to the funding and the construction side of public schools. But we started this process. It was important. We knew that this was a way we could add some comfort to our teachers and our families to return. And so we still move in that direction.
Well, good. We'll look forward to following up. And if there needs to be additional funding, that's sort of my role to reach out and try to procure that. So particularly for these schools, I'm very interested in doing that. So we're running a little low on time. I just want to say I really appreciate everyone being here, and please follow up with our office on specific needs that you have in your schools, or specific thoughts or specific questions. Joan Dentler from my team is on. I'll ask her to put her information in the chat. She's our lead on education here, and has done that for many, many years. So I'm sure that that many of you know her. But I was interested to see Teresa put information in answer to Danny's question about some low cost filters. And Pat and I were even talking about for homes, because a lot of COVID was spreading through homes where many families have to live together. And we're seeing that as being epicenters of spread. And then you have the Central Valley of California, which has some of the worst air quality in the country in any situation. And then, of course, the wildfires. And, we were even talking about advocating for that. Maybe we should just give everyone one of these air filters. So I'm going to personally look at some of Teresa's models and see what we can do to just get more of these out here, both in our schools and in homes, particularly where people are living and when you have many families together. So I'll give Teresa a final note. Anything you heard that you want to comment on?
The most exciting thing to me is that it's just amazing to be having this conversation with so many people who are now so well informed. I think it's amazing. Everything's come a long way in a year and a half, and people know like where they need to go, which is half the battle, I think. So having been talking about this for a very, very long time, or trying to get people to talk about this for a very long time, it's exciting to see. So yeah, I tried to just respond to some of the specific questions in chat, and happy if people want to send me an email, we can continue the conversation.
Great. And do we have your information? Did you put your information in the chat?
Yeah, it's on the slides, but and I think they're going to follow up with it. It's funny, Jeff mentioned building the Corsi Rosenthal box, which is a box fan with 4 air filters on the back. We actually just built some and tested those in our lab last week, and you can actually build a decent portable air cleaner for about $80 instead of $200. If I were a school district, I still think I'd probably spend the $200, but it makes a great science project too. So, so we're going to put that information on our website soon. We're just compiling it together. So, yeah, I'll put my info in the chat.
Great. And I also see the comment here that we're running that, and it also gets what Crystal said. Some of these solutions were Band-Aid solutions, and now we need to work towards more permanent solutions in some of these schools, and that's going to take funding, and that is my job to do. Jeff, any final thoughts?
Just that one. You know, I think it's right. You guys are right to be doing what you can with the dollars that you have. But to Crystal's and other people's comments, like there's a lot to do, and I think it's a, you know, can we use the momentum and attention on this to really get the more systemic upgrades that we need to quote unquote modernize our schools, right? They need to be climate ready. They need to be super healthy. They need to be wonderful and inspiring places. And some of them are, certainly, absolutely, but too many of them aren't. And, you know, it'll take political will and it'll take dollars. And so, you know, we at Berkeley are trying to kind of lead or be a leading voice on doing that, but would love to connect with you all outside of this about how do we build the awareness, build the political will, and then generate the investment to do so.
Good. Well, we will follow up on that. Hopefully this moves us in that direction. Laura, any final thoughts from you?
Just to thank you, Senator. And, you know, it feels very hopeful that so many stakeholders here on this call have common cause around making sure that the air inside our schools, that our children breathe, that adults in our schools breathe is healthy and safe. And so, again, leaving on a very hopeful note that, as Jeff said, where there's the political will, there's the way, and I think we can find it together.
Well said. We are all in this together to find these solutions. I learned a lot. I hope you did too. We will follow up with resources, and thank you all for joining.
Thank you so much, Senator.
Thanks, everyone.